This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today, people in 14 states and American Samoa go to the polls for Super Tuesday. About a third of the delegates needed to secure the Democratic presidential nomination are at stake. This comes after former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Amy Klobuchar dropped out of the race on Sunday and Monday, and last night endorsed former Vice President Joe Biden. A slew of other Democrats have also endorsed Biden following his South Carolina win, including former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, President Obama's national security advisor, Susan Rice, and former presidential challenger Beto O'Rourke. As the race heats up, billionaire former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg has vowed to stay in the race.
I talked to Mayor Pete and Amy Klobuchar. Both talked to Pete earlier today and Amy just a little while ago, and I wish them all the best. I thought both of them behaved themselves, is a nice way to phrase it, but they represented their country and their states very well, and I felt sorry for them, but I'm in it to win it.
This will be Bloomberg's first time on the ballot, and while he has not won a single race, he does lead his challengers in one key sense: campaign spending. He recently crossed the $500 million mark in ad spending alone, more than 10 times that of any of his Democratic rivals. Bloomberg's presidential campaign purchased primetime ad space Sunday night worth as much as $3 million so he could address the nation about the threat of coronavirus.
I know this has been a very worrisome week for many Americans. The coronavirus is spreading and the economy is taking a hit. Markets have fallen because of uncertainty. At times like this, it's the job of the president to reassure the public that he or she is taking all the necessary steps to protect the health and well-being of every citizen.
Since Bloomberg entered the race exactly 100 days before Super Tuesday, he's campaigned in all 14 Super Tuesday states and focused on states rarely visited by Democrats in primary fights, like Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. Also on the campaign trail, of course, is Democratic presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders, who remains the frontrunner. At a campaign rally in St. Paul, Minnesota, he told supporters of his former rivals Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg that the door is open, come in.
Whether you are conservative or whether you're progressive, whether you're Republican, independent, or Democrat, you understand that the United States cannot continue having as president somebody who is a pathological liar. And I think there are a lot of conservatives who understand that. You cannot continue having somebody who is running a corrupt administration. We cannot continue to have somebody who apparently has never read the Constitution of the United States, who is undermining American democracy and thinks that he is above the law. Well, in November, we are going to remind Donald Trump what democracy is about, because we're going to throw him out of office. But Trump is not just a liar, he is a fraud. And let me tell you something. The establishment is getting very, very nervous.
That was Senator Sanders speaking in Utah. He was also in Minnesota yesterday. For more, we host a debate today on the Democratic presidential rivals, Senator Bernie Sanders and billionaire former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. We're joined by two guests. Dr. Cornel West is professor of the practice of public philosophy at Harvard University. He's endorsed Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary and is his is Surrogate. He's written numerous books, most recently The Radical King, Martin Luther King Jr. His other books include Race Matters, which celebrated the 25th anniversary of the publication of this work with a new release. He's joining us from Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And with us in Washington, D.C. is Congressmember Bobby Rush of Illinois. He's national co-chair of the Mike Bloomberg 2020 presidential campaign. Congressmember Rush has served in office for more than 2 decades, since 1992. He got his start as a civil rights activist in the 60s. His background includes being both a co-founder of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panthers and the only member of the Democratic Party to have defeated Barack Obama in an election. That was in the 2000 Democratic congressional primary. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! I want to begin with Dr. Cornel West because of the unusual developments that took place in the last few days on the eve of today, on the eve of Super Tuesday, where you have several presidential candidates dropping out, Pete Buttigieg on Sunday, followed by Amy Klobuchar on Monday. And yesterday, both of them endorsed Joe Biden after his major win in South Carolina. But it was not only them who endorsed Joe Biden, also former presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke, and a roster of the Democratic establishment, leading President Trump to say it's a coup against Bernie Sanders. Dr. Cornel West, if you can talk about the significance of what has just taken place, with NBC also reporting on the, quote, hidden hand of Barack Obama in urging people to coalesce around Biden.
I hope what we are witnessing is the last gasp of not just the establishment in the Democratic Party, but the neoliberal wing of the power elites, of the ruling class. We got 3 options right now, Sister Amy. We got neo-fascist gangster status with Trump. You've got neoliberal wing of ruling class with the establishment of the Democratic Party. And you've got the progressive neo-populist, because Brother Bernie, my dear Brother Bernie, is not running on a Democratic socialist platform. He's running on a progressive neo-populist, it's FDR-like platform. We've got these 3 options. And the establishment now in the Democratic Party is in panic. They're hysterical because they don't know which way to go, and they're now falling behind a Joe Biden who is so weak in energy, weak in vision, weak in courage, nothing but a hangover from the earlier neoliberal elites in the Democratic Party. So in that sense, it's a compliment to Brother Bernie. It's a compliment of all of us because we are unstoppable.
So, Dr. Cornel West, why do you support Bernie Sanders? You did in 2016, you are now.
I think he provides the only hope, the only vision, energy, excitement, bringing different people together, not just the new voters, but most importantly, those who are concerned about poor and working class folk. We're right now in a moment of ecological catastrophe, where it's a moment of unbelievable political dysfunctionality, and neoliberal elites in the Democratic Party do not have what it takes to push out the neo-fascist gangster in the White House. And I must say this about Brother Bloomberg. I know Brother Rush gonna say this, but see, Brother Bloomberg, neoliberal gangster, gangsterized the police, 5 million precious black and brown and young folk pushed against the wall, tried to crush public education, pushed out quality teachers in bringing in all kind of bureaucratic folk under Joe Klein, and then, of course, tied to Wall Street, and most importantly, the escalation of the wealth inequality that's pulling the rug from under American democracy. So in that sense, Brother Bernie is the grand hope. That's why I was with him 4 years ago. That's why I'm with him now. And that's why I take a bullet, not in my heart, that's for my mama, on my side for my dear Brother Bernie.
Well, Congressmember Bobby Rush, he has laid down the gauntlet. Professor West has. Can you explain why you're the co-chair of the Mike Bloomberg presidential campaign, why you've chosen to support the former New York mayor?
Well, thank you very much, Amy, and I want to say good morning to my most profound friend and someone who I love and admire and respect, my soul brother, Dr. Cornel West. And
How you
of
doing,
course,
my brother? How you doing, my brother?
My brother. I respectfully do not agree with Dr. West on this most important matter. I believe that Mike Bloomberg is singly one individual that can, one, beat Donald Trump. It seems to me it's not, it should not be overlooked that the Trump gang is exuberant in their support of Bernie Sanders. And the reason why is that they think that Bernie Sanders is the ideal candidate. They could not create a better candidate to run against than Bernie Sanders, because they know that Bernie Sanders, his plans, his ideology, the things that he wanted to represent, and the things that he has promised, he knows that those will be regurgitated by most of the American voters, including many of the Democrats. So I think that Bernie Sanders' candidacy would represent such a farce and will allow those of us who are really concerned about solving some of the most serious problems that's associated with social dysfunction in our communities. And that dysfunction in our community has been highlighted, been created and developed because of this investment in our community. And we certainly want to have, finally, someone who understands the economic issues that the African-American community is reeling against, that's suffering because of the economic disinvestment in the African-American community. And I believe that Mike Bloomberg, in spite of, and because he understands the economics of how to create businesses, how to do investments, that he is the only candidate that could that have a hands-on idea about how to create the kind of investment in our community that will result in more stable communities, a robust economy, better schools, better homes. I think that Mike Bloomberg is the candidate, and will be, as president, he'll be the one that will make sure that African-American communities thrive. You know, I sit in my own city of Chicago. At one time, there were 9 black-owned banks in the city of Chicago. Today, there is only 1. Across the nation, only 23 black-owned banks in this country. That is horrible. How can we ever get our fair share of the economic pie without having access to banks and access to capital? That's just one of the things that Michael Bloomberg stands for. He's promised that he will create 1 million new black homeowners. The wealth in the African-American community is $17,000. The wealth in the white community is $117,000, 10 to 1. And what is that wealth based on? That wealth is based on home ownership. Most of the white middle class wealth is centered on their home ownership. We don't own homes. We need to have a president who understands that, who can look beyond all the rhetoric and see that that's a fundamental problem that we have to address. Secondly, Mike Bloomberg said he will create 1 million black-owned businesses. 1 million, that creates an economy, a robust economy. He will invest $70 billion directly into the black community. No other president, no other candidate, no other president has ever promised to invest $70 billion in the African-American community. For those reasons, and he will help Dr. West and I deal with this issue of the criminal justice system. We're going to correct that issue. We're going to make sure that that criminal justice system is fair. You know, but on that in terms of criminal justice, I have to say one thing. You know, look, Cornel and I, we understand about racial profiling. I have been against racial profiling all my adult life. I am against, and I have to use this term from the 60s. I am against racist dog, pig, policemen operating in our community in a lawless way. Now, that's not to say the whole departments in these across the nation act in a lawless way. But there are some police officers who's hell-bent on misusing their badge and brutalizing the African American. I am against that policy. Always have been and always will be.
So then how, Congressmember Rush, do you deal with those 5 million stops and frisks over the 3 terms of Mayor Bloomberg that he presided over with massive marches against him, et cetera?
I am absolutely opposed to that, but I believe that we are at a critical point in time. We're at a critical juncture in our history. And I believe that once we deal with the reason that the criminal justice system, that the crime is in terms of the African American, crime is high now. I'm not going to apologize. I live in the hood. Crime is high in our community. All right, there are millions of people who come to me every day asking me, "What are we going to do about this crime in Chicago? What are we going to do about this killing?" I am concerned because, we do have a high murder rate in my city and across this nation. So I'm not just going to say, put my hand over my eyes and stick my hand and not hear these cries.
Let me bring Cornel West back into this.
Let me say this. The problem, yes, sir. Let me just finish this. But that is that crime, those high rates of crime, that's a symptom of the problem. The problem really is the lack of disinvestment. The problem is the disinvestment in our community.
Okay,
we don't have no business.
Have Cornel West
we have no job.
But see, this is the challenge, though, Brother Rush, and I want people to know that I consider Brother Rush one of the great freedom fighters in the 60s. We would talk a couple of months ago. I see you there at the wedding of Fred Hampton. You the best man. And I say to myself, now Fred Hampton's one of the great freedom fighters. I think he would be with me on this, though. I don't see
Fred
him
Hampton
going with
gunned down
Bloomberg,
in
and I tell you
1969
why.
by the Chicago
I tell you why,
police.
my brother. I tell you why. Because one, Bloomberg didn't say a mumbling words when all of those homes were destroyed with Wall Street greed when Wall Street was bailed out. When Wall Street was bailed out, they had a choice. They could support the homeowners or they go with Wall Street greed. The neoliberals went with Wall Street greed. 1. 2, education, jobs, and investment in the community requires trying to transfer the money from the Wall Street greedy elites to working people. Bloomberg was against that, but not just Bloomberg, the whole neoliberal crowd, all of the folk now who are part of the Democratic establishment, their base is dissolving, the establishment itself is being pushed, and here comes Bernie Sanders, here comes the vision, here comes the power of the poor and working people.
But my dear brother, every one of those candidates who have run for a nomination have had to apologize to the black community for something. Bernie Sanders voted against the Brady bill 5 times. He's given comfort, aid and comfort to the NRA. And do you know what? I know you would agree with me, Doc. You would agree with me on this. Guns have been just dumped in our community. We got better access to guns than we do have to a bottle of Bell aspirin. Guns are so amenable to young, immature young men and women. They got total access. And the reason why is because the NRA has been the vanguard of the dumping these guns into our community. And I tell you, we don't.
But the NRA hates Bernie Sanders. The NRA hates me.
But Bernie Sanders, the record says that Bernie Sanders have voted 5 times. 5 times.
More than 100 leading black scholars, writers, and educators, including Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, Barbara Ransby, Mark Lamont Hill, issued a joint letter endorsing Bernie Sanders this weekend. It read in part, quote, "A Sanders presidency would go a long way toward creating a safer and more just world. The commitment to free college education, the elimination of student debt, which so many of our students suffer under, and the enfranchisement of incarcerated citizens are only some of the reasons we've come to this conclusion. His support of a commission to study reparations for slavery is another reason for our decision, as well as a staunch commitment to the needs of poor and working people all over the course of his career," they said. Well, we're joined by 2 guests, Washington, D.C., in Washington, D.C., Illinois Congressmember Bobby Rush, the former Black Panther. He was the first to beat President Obama when he ran for Congress decades ago. But he is now national co-chair for the Mike Bloomberg 2020 presidential campaign. And from Harvard University in Cambridge, Mass., we're joined by Professor Dr. Cornel West, who's endorsed Bernie Sanders. So this issue of, well, you've got this letter from the black academics. You have the massive win in Nevada, a real sweep, and in New Hampshire. But his loss in South Carolina, which seemed to be a turning point for so many, South Carolina, the first mainly African-American Democratic primary voting state, with 60% of the Democratic Party African-American there. Cornel West, if you can talk about the significance of this and what the plans are for today and ongoing.
Well, I think it was highly appropriate to hear Sister Karen Carpenter sing so beautifully about the masquerade that George Benson had sang about, because the neoliberal politicians in the Democratic Party constitute a masquerade. They hide and conceal their connections to Wall Street, their connections to militarism through the military-industrial complex, their connection to wealth inequality and poverty, and act as if they're concerned about working people and poor people. Every 4 years we discover the language goes one way, the policies go somewhere else. They're tied to big money, they're tied to big military, and they cannot execute what they talk about precisely because they do not have the organic links of everyday people, and their interests and monies are tied to the power elites. And so what we're actually witnessing for the first time is Bernie Sanders' campaign, no ties to big money, telling the people exactly what they need. They say they're empty promises. They said overthrowing apartheid was an empty promise. They said organizing a working class against greedy bosses was an was empty promise. They said women and gays and lesbians and precious trans and others could have rights and liberties. Oh, that's an empty promise. No, Bernie Sanders is saying what appears to be empty promises can, in fact, become real if people come together in the name not of the masquerade, you see, not of the neoliberal project that fetishizes markets, that privatizes education, that unleashes Wall Street greed, that repeals Glass-Steagall, which is very much what Biden has done. Biden unleashed that greed by repealing Glass-Steagall, crushing working people, architect of mass incarceration, going back to Strom Thurmond. We can go on and on and on. Biden, Bloomberg, masquerade. Karen Carpenter is right. If you want the real thing, if you want the Curtis Mayfields, Brother Rush, you know Curtis from Chicago. If you want the real thing, that's Bernie Sanders, my brother.
My good brother, social practice is the criterion of the truth. And if you look at Bernie Sanders' social practice, he has not passed in all his time in the Senate, in his time in the Congress, and I served with him, he has not passed not one single solitary bill that speaks to anything that he's promising right now. Not one bill has he passed. He has been one of the most...
Because the Congress has been so right-wing, brother.
No, listen.
The Congress has been so centrist and right-wing, my brother.
I just passed and I listened to legislation last week in the Congress, in the House. All right, Bernie, now, you have to be able to get things done. You just cannot promise. Again, brother, my friend, now in the West, social practice is a criterion of the truth. This revolution that Bernie Sanders is promising, where is that coming from? I can, you know as well as I, Dr. West, back in the 60s when we were on the streets doing grassroots organizing, I'm still in there.
Right.
I live in the hood. I live among the people who I represent and who I know that we have to try something different. There was a phenomenon in the 60s they were called armchair revolutionaries. Armchair revolutionaries. All right? Those who had theory and little practice. A lot of theory and a little practice.
Well, we don't have much time, so I want to put your question to Dr. Cornel West.
But Brother
the issue
Bernie's got millions of us behind him. That's social practice when you have millions of you behind you. But it's building on the legacy of Fred Hampton and the others, brother.
No. Look.
Let me ask you, Bobby Rush, a question. And this goes to your extremely valiant defeat in your own personal case of salivary cancer. You certainly have made health care an important issue. But Mayor Bloomberg does not agree with Bernie Sanders that Medicare for all is an answer. He said replacing private employer-provided health insurance is financially impossible and it wouldn't work in the United States. Yet in state after state, this issue of health care and the polls around Medicare for all are overwhelmingly positive. How do you respond to that, Congressman Rush?
Well, I think that Medicare for all is certainly the goal. It's a question of how do you get to that goal. You have to incrementally, or step by step, you have to get to that goal. I'm for Medicare. Look, I believe that if you were born, then you have a right to the best health care that is in existence. You have that right. But how do we, as responsible individuals, how do we get there? How do we pay for it? How do we keep a sense of faith in the system? All right,
Well, let me put that question to Dr. Cornel West, because you're saying, how can this be implemented, this critical question?
Absolutely, because see, what Brother Rush will not say is the greed of the pharmaceutical industry, the greed of the private insurance industry, that's what stands in the way. That's what makes it incremental, because their interests are so entrenched and tied to neoliberal Democratic Party politicians. Same was true in terms of our struggle against white supremacy. They told us to do what? Be incremental, be incremental. No, it was the greed of white supremacists that stood in the way. We had to be courageous. We had to be visionary. That's what the Sanders campaign's all about.
Cornel West, I wanted to ask you a question about one of the candidates who dropped out. It may surprise many people. Bobby Rush, let me just ask him this question. Cornel, the question of Pete Buttigieg, it may surprise many that you've known him since he was in diapers. You're extremely close friend of his father, the Gramsci scholar, Professor Buttigieg, who famously wrote, "The crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear." Do you consider Biden and Bloomberg morbid symptoms?
Well, let me first say that Brother Pete Buttigieg is like family to me. His father was like a blood brother. He's the great Gramsci scholar, Dean of Humanities at Notre Dame. He and I would go to Italy every summer and be part of the International Gramsci Society. I love Brother Joe. I love Brother Pete and Ann. I just have political and ideological disagreements with my dear Brother Pete. But Pete has now has adjusted to this neoliberal rule. There's no doubt about that. And I think Biden does not have what it takes to beat the gangster in the White House. I don't think Bloomberg has what it takes because he's a gangster too. You can't have a neoliberal gangster against a neo-fascist gangster and think you're going to generate the kind of moral and spiritual vision and energy needed to push out Trump. And so that's the reason why Bernie Sanders is so very important. And yet I can understand people we're desperate. The establishment is desperate. American democracy is going under. The planet is going under. Everything's at stake, as my dear sister Nina Turner says, that we love. We are in this thing all the way. We're going to Milwaukee. We're going to Washington, D.C. We've got to reinvigorate American democracy or it's over.
Bobby Rush, I'm going to give you the last word. And you mentioned something earlier about you being the sponsor of this historic bill that passed the House almost unanimously, the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill. Emmett Till, of course, the 14-year-old boy from Chicago, where you're from, who went to Money, Mississippi for the summer, asleep in the house of his uncle and aunt and cousins, and he was lynched by a white mob. If you could finally comment on your deep concern about police brutality, about lynching, and again going back to, because I'm sure many people are scratching their heads, the mayor, Mike Bloomberg, not just being from New York City, but presiding over this massive disenfranchisement of black and brown children, more than 5 million stops and frisks during his 3 terms. He even went after the judge who ruled the stop and frisk program unconstitutional.
Let me say, Amy, and I'm glad you asked that question, because to me, there's really not any contradiction. I'm for justice, freedom, justice, and equality. That's been the hallmark of my life. I also know that, you know, if we're, to me, what's catalyzing, what really is making it, I want to try once and for all at this critical time, as Dr. West said, in these desperate times, I want to try something else. Dr. West, I agree with you. The liberal elite has been a barrier to those critical concerns that we have in the African American community. The life concern, death, life and death is really the issue. And I, for the first time, I'm looking for something different. I'm looking for a candidate for president, and I believe that candidate, Mike Bloomberg, who really understands mistakes that he made. He didn't listen to people. He apologized. He asked for forgiveness. He has made atonement, but also know that he's not just a one-dimensional man. I know that the House of Representatives, with Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House, would not be in place right now. The Democrats would not be in control if Mike Bloomberg had not spent his money to help elect Democrats to take the House back. His investment.
Bobby Rush, we're going to have to end it here, but I'm going to ask you both if we can have a rematch here. Today is Super Tuesday. Coming out of Super Tuesday, we're going to set up another head-to-head between Bobby Rush, the national co-chair for the Mike Bloomberg 2020 presidential campaign, former Black Panther, the person who beat President Obama when he was running for Congress decades ago.
And this is not head-to-head, not in that sense. I love my brother. I want him on my side.
I meant that in the most respectful sense. And Dr. Cornel West, thank you so much for being with us. Professor at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, The Intercept's Ryan Grimm joins us to talk about the latest developments on this Super Tuesday. Stay with us.